Hello, and welcome to Past, the podcast about those who would never rule. I'm Veronica Fortune, and this week's episode is Not Such a Magnificent Life, Part 3, The Sons of Suleiman the Magnificent. Hello, welcome back. Sorry about leaving you hanging last week. And this week I'm not going to jump right back into the story. First, I have to fix a pronunciation. I pronounced Suleiman's daughter. Let's see if I can do this right, guys. Mirama's name, incorrectly countless times last week and in the first episode. So even though she hasn't been with the world for more than 400 years at this point, Mirama, I'm again sorry. Hopefully I'll get it right for the rest of this episode. Okay. Also, instead of going straight back to the story, I'm going to discuss sources a little. Okay, let me just get right into it. Now, I'm quite lucky that in addition to Clot's excellent book and other sources, there is a well-written essay, sorry for any mispronunciations again, by Zahit Atsil, a respected professor of Ottoman history, titled, "Why Did Suleiman the Magnificent Execute His Son, Shehzadeh Mustafa, in 1553? Which is going to help me explain why Suleiman would blunder so deeply and, execute his son Mustafa. Why do I say blunder? If I haven't made it clear already, Mustafa was a great choice to succeed his father. He was respected by his future subjects. The Janissary, the skilled military part that he'd be leading, preferred him. The kings of Europe were afraid of him. He was the right choice, at least from a power point of view. Interestingly, Dr. Arshil disagrees with me. It is a rarity in monarchy to be able to choose your successor, and I think Suleiman chose wrong. Since we're living in the universe where he chose wrong, we get to discuss why. Multiverse tours, anyone? Hopefully at this point, I've put all the pieces into play. Suleiman had 4 living sons in 1552. Mustafa, Selim, Bayezid, and Shehenger. And his daughter, Mirama, was married to Rustem, the Grand Vizier. Suleiman himself is legally married to the mother of his 4 younger children, Roxolana. Roxolana, Mirama, and Rustem prefer either Selim or Bayezid to succeed Suleiman. Shehenger, while a loved member of the family, is not eligible to rule due to a birth defect. Finally, Mustafa is showing the traits of a successful future emperor. He is supported by his mother, Mahidevran, the military class, and the middle class in Istanbul. And now, in the winter of 1552 to 1553, Suleiman is, sick. How sick? We don't know for sure, but sick enough that people thought he was going to die. Suleiman was in his late 50s at this point, so older in the period he lived in. Suleiman's father had died at 49 and his grandfather at 64, so within their range, though we know one of those was possibly helped along. With Mustafa having so much support, it looked like he might do what his grandfather, Selim I, had done: usurp Suleiman. Selim I hadn't been his own father's first choice to succeed him. That had been his brother Ahmed. But Selim I had the support of the Janissary, much like Mustafa. He had used that support to win the empire, and Suleiman couldn't have been unaware of the parallels. The other strike against Mustafa was his father's love for his stepmother, Roxolana. Her safety and power base were at risk if Mustafa succeeded. Her sons would likely be killed, and she would have no say in government. Her daughter's safety was also at risk. A Mustafa Sultanate could quickly remove Rustem, and doing so, Mirama's prestige and power. And as I've mentioned, Mustafa had his own little court in Amasya on at least 2 occasions, once in 1549 and again in 1550. Rustem denied Mustafa additional military support, fearing that the prince would win victories that would raise his profile and esteem. Rustem then sent a spy into Mustafa's service, appointing his own ally, Ahmed Pasha, as Mustafa's vizier. Apparently, Mustafa's abilities charmed the spy who switched sides. So it's becoming very obvious that Rustem was working against Mustafa. But Suleiman seemed to support his son. It means that Rustem needed to start playing even dirtier. It's alleged that he had some part in starting to spread rumors in the winter of 1552 to 53 that Suleiman was ill, close to dying even. These rumors prompted some of Rustem's Janissaries, who were accompanying him towards Persia for the Third Safavid War, to leave, to go to Mustafa and to swear allegiance to him. They even kissed his hand. Rustem even allegedly made sure those who heard the rumor thought that Suleiman was going to abdicate in favor of Mustafa. The Janissary who joined Mustafa really hurt his cause. Mustafa had also written to a Venetian ambassador and the Venetian Senate to ask for their assistance in gaining the throne, as in preventing his brothers from becoming sultan. But it doesn't help that he did this while his father was alive and rather unwell. Rustem, of course, used this behavior to his advantage. He sent word to Suleiman that his soldiers weren't following his orders and shared the reasons why. Suleiman didn't believe his son could betray him at first. Suleiman recalled Rustem to Istanbul and put him in charge of preparing the imperial navy. He, Suleiman, recovered from his illness and would lead his own men. Bayezid, along with government officials, was left in charge of the city. On his march to Eregli, Suleiman asked Mustafa to join him. Mustafa was warned by his advisors and his mothers not to go, but he wanted to prove to his father that he was a dutiful son. Full disclosure, had he not gone, it would have been everything short of a declaration of war on his father. Mustafa reached his father's camp on the 5th of October, 1553. Rustem had joined Suleiman at this point as well. Rustem had presented Suleiman with a falsified document bearing Mustafa's seal. The document was a letter offering Mustafa's aid to the Safavid ruler against Suleiman. Officials from his father's camp visited Mustafa and made arrangements for him to visit his father the next day. Overnight, an arrow was thrown into Mustafa's camp to warn him that he would die if he visited his father. Mustafa heard the warnings, and on the morning of the 6th of October, he visited his father's tent. He left his sword outside, as was tradition, and went to kiss his father's hand. Once he reached the inner portion of the tent, he was attacked by mutes and strangled to death. He fought for his life, and it apparently actually looked for a moment like he might survive. But it was not to be. At either 35 or 36, Mustafa was dead. It left the path clear for his younger brothers. But that would be its own battle. Mustafa's surviving son, Mehmed, was killed sometime after his death and prior to May 1554. Oh, and Rustem was quickly, as in on the spot, removed as Grand Vizier. He actually snuck out of Suleiman's camp overnight to avoid the Janissary killing him. Literally, they attacked his tent the next morning, and Suleiman could not have done anything about that. He would be reappointed as Grand Vizier in 1555 and serve until his own death in 1561. At that point, he was only 55 or 56, which gives you an indication of how young he was when he started. Now, I think I should answer the question here. Would Mustafa have been a better ruler than the person who ruled instead of him? Spoilers, the person who ruled instead of him, for at least the first 13 years after his death, was Suleiman. Yes, no one could have predicted that the unwell and aging man would live until he was 71. Honestly, I'm impressed. I'll even spoil more for you. He died on campaign. Yeah, he was in Hungary, trying to make his way to finally capture Vienna, which was his ultimate European goal. So had Mustafa only lived as long as his grandfather, Selim I, at 49, he would never have had a the chance to rule. If he had managed to stop his father from executing him, he may not have lived long enough to succeed him. Granted, him surviving would have protected his son, and he may have had other sons who wouldn't have made it. Okay, but what if Mustafa had lived long enough to succeed his father peacefully? Well, the brother who wins this race to Winchester is Selim, who will earn himself the sobriquet, the drunkard. Now, I need to mention that the consumption of alcohol in Islam is usually considered haram, or again, forbidden. There is some debate on which alcohols are banned, and I'm not up for that debate. I'm not a scholar of Islam. Needless to say, Selim II's rule wasn't that of a strong sultan. And this is where Dr. Achil and I disagree. He thinks that Mustafa needed to die to stop the usurpation of Suleiman because that would have set a bad precedent for Ottoman rule. And I think Mustafa would have been a much better ruler for the Ottoman people than his brother. Selim II wasn't seen publicly very much and didn't lead military campaigns. He was very much a private sultan. I don't think this is necessarily a good thing. And Selim only ruled for 8 years, dying due to his drunkenness. I don't think Suleiman had much of a choice when it came to Mustafa. But I don't know if Mustafa was actually going to try to overthrow his father. To me, looking through different opinions on this, I see a smart guy who blundered poorly into a checkmate. He wasn't helped by the fact that his father was showing favoritism to his younger half-brothers, and that he didn't have a sister to marry off to a powerful official. His mother had been sent away with him, and so she couldn't help him in the politics of Istanbul. As someone who is, as far as I know, of European descent, I think for my ancestors, Mustafa's death was lucky. I think the rulers of Europe had a reason to be fearful of him. Okay, so with Mustafa gone, I should probably talk about the other series' past, Bayezid. Unlike Mustafa, Bayezid didn't blunder into his inn. He rebelled for it. In Clot's book, he discusses Suleiman's sons with regards to how they were discussed within the French court. Guillaume Postet, a French diplomat, wrote back to Paris in detail about each son. But of Bayezid, quote, "Nothing was said because there was nothing to say," end quote. And this has been my struggle finding information about Bayezid until the last decade of his life. He shows up occasionally going on campaign with his father, but really, until Mustafa's downfall, there is nothing to say. He did have a few appointments to governorships in Karaman and Konya, and then finally Kütahya. It's only after Mustafa's death that Bayezid's actions come to the forefront. I've mentioned it before, but he was the first choice for his sister and her husband. His brother Selim, though, thought he was the first choice of the religious leaders. But until Mustafa died, there really isn't much telling us why. It turns out that he was rather ambitious and politically aware. And oddly, it's Mustafa who caused Bayezid to become important to this story. Or at least, faux Mustafa. Yes, this story includes a false pretender. Now, Suleiman displayed Mustafa's body publicly, and Mustafa's janissaries attacked Rustam's tent in a rage. There was no rational argument that he was still alive. But for some reason, in 1555, 2 years after Mustafa's death, this random man, was able to convince many of the citizens of Erigli, a city in northwest Anatolia, to join him. This false pretender and his supporters traveled into the European holdings of the Ottoman Empire and received support from the citizens of Thrace, Macedonia, and Dobruja, part of present-day Romania. He tried to take the city of Edirne, near modern-day Bulgaria. His failure at taking this city led to Bayezid's moment of victory. The Shehzadeh was sent to crush the rebellion and hanged the false pretender. Of note, he may have brought the man back to Istanbul to be tried, but I'm struggling with different sources saying different things. I did give you guys a big disclaimer about this. What's fascinating, though, is that the whole rebellion might have been Bayezid's fault. In the imperial harem, The book, not the general location. Pierce states the Habsburg ambassador's description of Roxolana trying to protect Bayezid from Suleiman's wrath following the end of the False Pretender rebellion. Bayezid may have supported the pretender. To be fair, it's unlikely he started the rumor, but Bayezid would have been a powerful person to agree that this false pretender was his supposedly dead half-brother. And what could have possibly motivated him to do this? Was he doing this to prevent Selim from gaining any further power? Or possibly to look like the hero when he took down the false pretender? We have no way of knowing his reason. But his mother, as all imperial mothers, tried to protect him from his father, at least this time. Father and son actually expressed their frustration with each other through poetry. And I find the fact that Roxolana had to try to protect her son to be very telling. It tells us something might have happened here. Bayezid might have had something to do with it. And she wanted to keep him safe, at least till the end. For the moment, father and son were realigned. Bayezid wasn't done poking the bear, though. Selim was an unimpressive candidate, as I've mentioned. He was drunk, militarily unimpressive, and he didn't have the support from anyone. If Bayezid had kept his head down and just waited for Suleiman to die, he probably would have succeeded, especially if he could get Mustafa's former supporters to his side. But he didn't. Bayezid instead found things to complain about. Selim had done something similar to Mustafa. He had only produced one son, Murad, with the woman he would eventually marry, Nurbanu. Selim also, at this point, say 1558, had 3 or 4 daughters, also with Nurbanu. The couple did have 4 daughters in total, just to be clear, but the year of birth of the youngest is not completely clear. Pierce theorizes that Selim and Mustafa had both done this to prevent their sons from having to deal with a succession struggle. Bayezid, on the other hand, had taken a similar route to their father. By 1558, he had 4 sons with 3 different women, and only a year later, he would have a 5th son, again with a different mother from his older sons. He also had 4 daughters. Roxolana, again, seems to have favored Bayezid. Sadly, he couldn't win over the Janissaries. Those went to Selim. But in March 1558, Bayezid would lose his great support, and Suleiman would be devastated. Roxolana died at the age of only 53 or 54. Remember, he doesn't know it yet, but Suleiman has another 8 years to live without his great love and support. You should also remember that a mother acts as her son's supporter and guidance. While Roxolana hadn't done the traditional motherly act of following her son, normally there would have been only one son, remember, she was still involved in the lives of all of her sons. She likely had advised Bayezid in ways to gain his father's support. We know that she begged Suleiman not to blame him for the false pretender uprising. While Bayezid didn't win over the Janissary and had lost his mother, he still had his sister and Rustem, who was again Grand Vizier, on his side. While Bayezid's own mistakes will end him, in the end, his brother-in-law Rustem didn't help. First, Rustem tried to help Bayezid by sending a mole, Lala Mustafa, Lala to avoid any confusion with Mustafa, into Selim's camp. It seems this idea never worked out for this generation of Ottoman sons. This spy had been seemingly devoted to Bayezid, but when he joined Selim's court, he looked out for his own interests. He was able to convince Selim to support him into tricking Bayezid into making mistakes. Now, Suleiman wasn't an idiot. At least, I don't think he was. He knew his 2 sons would likely battle to the death for his title once he was gone. To make things a bit more fair, he assigned them to governorships that were about equidistant in relation to Istanbul. He also assigned Bayezid's oldest sons and Selim's only sons to governorships. Oh, and Bayezid received a huge stipend. Suleiman really wanted to avoid war before he died. He also warned Bayezid to behave. So, what did Lala do with all of this? Well, he convinced Selim to allow him to send a letter to Bayezid offering to help him destroy Selim. It does feel like a double, triple cross. Bayezid fell right into the trap and wrote back agreeing. Selim was less than happy. Lala then forged a letter from Bayezid to Selim that included insults and odd gifts with sexual implications. At this point, Selim told Suleiman. Suleiman, of course, sent Bayezid a letter telling him to control himself. Lala murdered the messengers and tricked Suleiman into thinking Bayezid had done so. Yes, mobile phones and more normal familial relationships would probably have helped everyone in this family. Bayezid was fired as governor, but refused to leave his holdings. Selim was then appointed to a more prestigious governorship. Bayezid had 20,000 soldiers ready to support his attempt to destroy Selim. Selim had his father's support. Literally, Suleiman sent him military support. He also sent his third vizier, Sokulu Mehmed, who apparently was more capable than both Rustem and Lala. There was a battle. Bayezid lost, but survived. He fled and sent a letter to his father begging for forgiveness. In news that should surprise no one, Lala got to the letter first, and Suleiman never saw it. Bayezid, fearing for his life, rightly, fled further into Yerevan, in modern-day Albania. And from there, he basically asked for asylum in Persia. The Shah, Tahmasp, welcomed him, and they met in Tabriz, in modern-day Iran. Well, I say asylum. Bayez was a hostage, but a princely one. He was welcomed with great ceremony and even a party. He got presents and some horses. And the Shah was negotiating with Suleiman to send him home for money. Yes, the Shah even thought it would be just to turn over his hostage, since, Bayezid had betrayed his father, at least according to those who tricked Bayezid into doing so. In the end, just like Mustafa, Bayezid's actual loyalty to his father wouldn't matter. The Shah was paid well, and Bayezid was no longer a guest. Instead, one of Suleiman's executioners visited the Shah's court and killed Bayezid and 4 of his 5 sons on the 25th of September, 1561. His youngest son, who wasn't even 1, had remained within the Ottoman Empire and was executed less than a month later on the direct orders of Suleiman. Oh, and Rustem didn't even live to see the fall of his preferred candidate. He had died of brain swelling in July, just days after Bayezid lost against Selim and Suleiman. Rustem was replaced by Semiz Ali, who would last until almost the end of Suleiman's reign. With that, there was only one, Selim. Europe likely sighed with relief. Instead of one of Suleiman's intelligent, thoughtful, powerful sons, they would be faced with his weakest son. Would Bayezid have been a better ruler than his brother? Well, again, I'm of European descent, so I should probably give a sigh of relief. But I try to answer this as someone living under their rule. I think if I were an Ottoman who wanted to see my country led by a strong sultan, which I think most people wanted, I would have been disappointed to be left with Selim. Suleiman wasn't an overly popular sultan in his own empire, but his expanse of his said empire was useful for his people's economic health. Overall, I think Mustafa would have been seemingly great for the empire, and Bayezid would have been better than Selim. Unlike previous sultans, Selim did not lead his men into battle. Suleiman, on the other hand, actually died while on campaign, as I spoiled for you earlier. As I've mentioned, he would live until 1566. He died on the 6th of September that year, at about 71 years of age, in modern-day Hungary. He actually died in his tent right before the final siege of the Battle of Siget, which the Ottomans won. He was trying to make it to Vienna, his unobtainable goal for the European side of his empire. His death wasn't announced until the army was retreating due to the incoming winter. The sitting Grand Vizier, Sokolu Mehmed, waited 3 weeks before announcing Suleiman's death. In fact, it looks that it wasn't actually announced until right before Selim was girded as Selim II on the 29th of September, 1566. Fun fact, Sokolu Mehmed was a rather long-serving Grand Vizier and would serve Suleiman, obviously, the very end of his reign, Selim and Selim's son, Murad II, one of only 3 Grand Viziers to serve 3 distinct rulers. As you might remember, at the time of his girding, Selim had 1 son, Murad, and 1 grandson, Mehmed. Selim appears to have been worried that something might happen to his son and decided to take care of this problem. As in, really take care of it. He had 3 sons born in 1571. Yes, so 3 individual sons born that year. Another son born in 1572. 2 further sons born in 1573, and a final son born in 1574. And while 2 of these younger sons would die in infancy, the 5 who survived were all executed by Murad upon Selim's death. I would also like to point out that Selim didn't need to worry about Murad letting him down on succession. Murad had 27 sons, totally blowing Henry I out of the water. You may remember him from back in the first series. He also, Murad, had more than 30 daughters and could have had up to a total of 100 children. In addition to Murad's oldest son, Mehmed, 2 other sons, Selim and Muhammad, were born in Selim's lifetime. So these 3 oldest boys were full brothers, and I guess in one lucky moment, the younger Selim and Muhammad died of natural causes prior to Murad's death, meaning their brother didn't have to deal with killing his own full brothers as a succession issue. And just because it's entertaining to point out, if you are curious, Murad's large number of children was a response, an overcompensation, shall we say, for rumors of impotence. I want to discuss the brother that could never have succeeded, since he didn't get much attention earlier. I'll call this the Xinghingar prologue, and it's a bit of a thought experiment. Now, as I've mentioned, due to his birth defect, Xinghingar was never expected to succeed. He couldn't lead armies. But you should remember from a few minutes ago, Selim II didn't really lead armies. In addition, since he could never lead, he was never really a threat to any of his older brothers. When you're looking him up in older writings, there will always be some statement that Xinghingar died of a broken heart after Mustafa's death. But the more recent researchers I've found don't think this was the case. Likely he died of a lung infection due to his severe spinal curvature. Remember, before antibiotics, things that we don't even think about these days were deadly. Had he survived, I have a little theory that it would have been a good idea for any of his brothers to keep him alive. This could have been the chance to change the way succession occurred in the Ottoman Empire. Do I think that was likely? No. But it's an interesting thought experiment. It's a reminder that any heir can threaten the winner. Maybe he would have ended up locked in a palace, like other people we know of. Before I leave today, I wanted to remind you that I have changed my Patreon tiers slightly. First, I've added 2 tiers. One for commissioning a YouTube video. This is more than the level for a podcast episode to respect the fact that editing videos takes much longer. So much longer than audio episodes. In addition, these episodes will be released to the general public, unlike podcast special episodes. The second new tier is for those who want to commission both a podcast episode and a YouTube video. As with the current podcast episode tier, you'll need to be at these tier levels for at least 6 months before I will release the episode. But I'll be in contact with you right away regarding your subject, because I really do like communicating with my patrons. And I think all of you know that when you message me, I get back to you all quickly. I really do love the little community we're starting to build. The other change is that all members in the lowest tier will now get special episodes. I've decided to keep the heir apparent and presumptive tiers at $5 and $2 respectively. But those in the heir apparent tier will be getting a shout out. I wanted to do this to make the heir presumptive tier an option for students or those with a lower income who still want to listen to special episodes and support the show. If you can help support my work by joining the tier that's $5 per month, then I thank you. But if you can only afford $2, thank you, and you still get episodes. I mean it, I'm grateful for every single one of you. Those in the presumptive tier won't get shoutouts or a producer credit on videos. Sorry, I do have to differentiate things. And I'd like to welcome my newest patron, Catherine. Welcome, and thank you so much for your support. With that, I will see you all very soon for some episodes about the High Kings of Ireland, which as a name is apparently anachronistic. Thank you very much. Bye. Thank you for listening to Past. I can be found on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at PastPod. That's PASSEDPOD. Please feel free to email me at pastpod@gmail.com. I have a Patreon that can be found at patreon.com/pastpod.